Today we're going to talk about genetics. Becca and I both have been talking and sharing a little bit about this on social media. And so many questions. This is something that we do offer like a standalone for. I think the information that we're going to share today will help you understand like the value and when you might consider it. But as I was saying to a few people, like it's not going to be like the answer to everything. And there's so many nuances. And, you know, when we think about like weight loss, for example, so much value can be drawn from this as to why I might struggle and things that I might need to do differently or consider. And I'll talk about that when we get to fasting. I know you will as well. But at the end of the day, there's a variety of factors. And so before we kind of get into this, when we're looking at, you know, genetics, it's very powerful because they don't change, which is really cool. But what we're talking about here is more of the gene SNPs that are what we call low penetrance. And so it's really cool because low penetrance basically means we can absolutely influence these things with our diet and our lifestyle. And if you've listened to us for a while, you may have heard our interviews with Dr. Ben Lynch. We love his book called Dirty Genes. He refers to how you can have genes that are born dirty, which we're going to show you today visually, or are just acting dirty because your lifestyle is kind of dirty, right? Maybe you have some infections or toxins that need to be cleared out of the body. But at the same token, we're going to show you how this can maybe impact your healing and why you might fight harder than some others. But then there's also something called high penetrance genes, and that is not what this tests for. Those are going to be things like the BRCA gene. You know, we know that's very well associated with like estrogen cancers and breast cancer. And so you would be getting that done through, you know, like your doctor. These tests are really going to be what's clinically and scientifically validated, I should say, by research as well, that can really give us some good insights into how your diet should be adjusted, maybe supplementations that you need, like long term. This also can help you not waste money on supplements, which I think is something that we see often.
Oh, yeah. And so before we dive into this, we want to talk about something very special. We started FitMom. We do all of this to make an impact, right? Like we want to touch as many lives as possible. We want to share as much information. Hence why Liz and I put out so much stuff on social media. Like we want to help people. We want to provide as much information as possible. And so we were questioning whether we were going to run our scholarship again or not, but we are. So we did this last year for the first time, and we just had this like overwhelming response. And essentially we will be giving away one person a free experience with us to
we'll
come
say
on.
full ride.
Full ride scholarship. Everything is covered. You come on and, you know, ultimately you are getting supported by our team, which is typically an investment, you know? And there are some people that truly cannot afford what we offer. And that is understandable, obviously, but we really do want to help people. And so what we are going to be doing is we are going to be talking about that on social media. You will see it. We will send out links to where you can learn more about it, be on our email list, because the scholarship applications open this Sunday night at midnight. You don't need to stay up until midnight. They will be open throughout the week for a few days at least. And depending on how much of a response we get, we will, you know, we potentially will close down the application shorter than what we intend. But we want to see the response we get. We had an incredible response last year, and since then, both Liz and I have, you know, the following has grown of FitMom, the, you know, number of people that know about it. So keep your eyes peeled.
Yep.
You will want to be on our email list. You will want to be following us on social media, because that is where you will get all of the information on how you can apply, the details around it, and, you know.
Yeah, I want to just give you a couple of tips as well. So how can I win? Like this is a big deal. This is thousands of dollars that we're talking about. We're giving away over $25,000. If we think about year 2025 coming up, we want to help prepare you. So this is going to be when we think like the last quarter of the year, October, November, December, like this is the time, guys. And like, if you're going to sit there and be the person that says, well, that's in the holidays, holiday is a day. Okay. First of all, let's remember that. You know, you could say, well, it's the holidays. Then this isn't for you. You're not seriously committed about your health.
You're not ready.
So there's the one thing, and that's the tough love about this. But the second thing that I wanted to share here is how you can increase your chances of winning is be super vulnerable in the video. So there is going to be two parts to the application. There is going to be a form that you're going to fill out. You're going to share a little bit about yourself, your health history, and whatnot. But if you really want to be considered for the full ride, that person must have a video. The videos last year, oh my God, Becca and I both were in tears so many times.
I wanted to give away so much more than just what we agreed to.
Yes. Because there are so many people struggling and the stories are heart-wrenching. And in our practice, we deal a lot with complex cases, including people who have gone to functional medicine doctors or other practitioners and not just conventional medicine and still haven't found answers. And we're very proud to say, like, we help a lot of these people who haven't been helped. Like, give us the complex cases. We love it. We love working with our mentors. We have several mentors in our corner as well as medical teams. And so, you know, if you want to increase your chance of winning, like, you need to get on camera. And I know it can be really uncomfortable, but you need to be vulnerable. We are vulnerable with you guys every single day. Things that we share on this podcast, things that we share on our social media, both in our personal life, in business, because this life that we live is not easy. It is not for the faint. There are challenges. And so we're basically asking you to do what we do every single day. And that is show up and tell us your story. Tell us who you are, what this would mean to you. You know, understanding your history and symptoms is one thing, but like, how I want to know, how is this going to impact your life? How is this going to improve the mom that you are, the wife that you are, how you show up in the world, the contributions that you can give? Those are the things that really matter to us. In addition to that, you will also have an opportunity, if you're not chosen to be that full ride winner, to potentially get one of the 5 partial scholarships. So we did this last year because, again, there was such an overwhelming response. Like, we couldn't really decide and we can't give everything away. And so some key dates that I want you to kind of write down and put in your back pocket, because this is really important. Like, we are on a time crunch. We want to get people in and started. Applications are going to open Monday, as Becca mentioned, or Sunday night at midnight. That's the 23rd. You're going to have next week to fill that out. We are going to be meeting and deciding somewhere around the 27th, 28th, what we are doing moving forward in terms of how much the responses are and the videos and things like that. By the 1st of October, we will have chosen our winner and we will have a list of people that can come to an interview for the partial scholarship. So you need to watch those dates, watch your email. If you're not on our email list, links are in the show notes. You can always go to our website, but you also want to whitelist that. So if you're not getting the email for some reason that, like, hey, application confirmed that's received, then you want to let us know or someone on our team know, because most likely it's been caught in spam. So just go to your spam, search FitMom, hello at FitMom, or info at FitMom. Some of those emails can, easily be flagged. So you need to whitelist our emails. 99% of the time people tell us they don't get the emails. We look in our system and you've gotten the email. It's just that it's in your spam filter. Okay. So those are a couple tips. Get vulnerable, get on camera, tell us your story. Mm-hmm. They're only shared with us.
Yep.
So back to genetics.
Yes.
We are going to share the test with you that we're talking about today. So we utilize something called Pro7 by Fagron Genomics. We also utilize a test that I have recently learned about and ran a couple of times for clients as well as my husband, and just submitted mine today, even though I already have a genetics test, is called the 3x4. And there's a little bit of variance here. So generally we run the Pro7, and that's what we're going to show you today because it's simple. It's color coded. I'm a visual person. It's red, yellow, and green. And we're going to go through the key and what that means. But it can give you some insights into things that you could do supplementally, things you can do in your lifestyle, some laboratory recommendations, and also a couple of dietary recommendations. But the key is the interpretation is where the beauty lies, because it's not just about one gene. It's not about supplementing a gene. It's about how genes interplay together and how they're connected. And so we're going to share a lot of stories with you throughout. So if you're not on video right now on YouTube, go to our YouTube channel. Link is in the show notes, and sit down, take some notes, watch us as we go through this particular report. The 3x4 genetics is something that I like to run if I'm really concerned about someone's metabolic health. I'm really concerned about answering a specific question related to, let's say, saturated fats because their lipid profile. That's how I found 3x4 actually for my husband. One day he'll let me tell the whole story, but he's in some protocols right now, some deep, intense protocols. And it's really because of some of the things that we identified for him. And so that test is a little bit more overwhelming visually, I'm not going to lie. But it also has some things that the Pro 7 doesn't in terms of like training, how you might want to train for your lifestyle, the type of training that you would respond better to. So they even get down to like, are you better at fast or slow twitch, movements, or is resistance training going to be, better for you? Just different things like that. But most of the time we're running the Pro 7 because again, and we've had this from other clinical practitioners, it can be really overwhelming with a 3x4. It's a beautiful test. They've done a phenomenal job. It's very colorful. It's very visual, but it can be really overwhelming. So that's why we choose to do this particular test. And I'll let Becca talk about the validity of these compared to some others.
Yeah, for sure. Because a lot of people are like, well, I have 23andMe data or I have Ancestry.com data. And you guys, those tests were designed to research the population as a whole, essentially. Like whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, like, yeah, I think it's good to have a lot of information on people. But they were not intended, nor was the research around them done to be intended for like clinical application of protocols or recommendations for the people taking them, which is why we don't use them. And so, how beneficial they are, I don't think that if I were to choose, I would not utilize them. And I've also really struggled to use them if people have that information. It's not laid out properly for, the ability to apply things from it. So yeah, if you have not gotten one and you're looking at getting one, do not go that route. They just are not very useful, to be totally honest, for the actual person that's trying to get it done for that reason. So in terms of genetics, I think, when people ask questions like, why does this work for them and not for me? Why does this person seem to be able to tolerate so much more than I can? Why do I live a really healthy life, yet I deal with these chronic symptoms? Maybe when perimenopause hit, like the wheels fell off. Maybe we developed gray hair at 35. Maybe every time we go out to eat, we gain 5 pounds and feel super inflamed, like our skin is tight, We have gut issues that never go away. Or maybe you have more serious concerns of, hey, my parents had Alzheimer's, or my dad had Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, or my grandma had breast cancer, or, ALS, or whatever it might be. That's where I think genetic testing can come in, It gives you, in my experience and opinion, it explains you. Like it validates you. Like it's like when I got my genetics, I was like, holy shit. This is why I am how I am. Like this is why I'm like kind of crazy.
Your mood.
This is why I have and it really does. And it's so fascinating. Like if I were to pick one test, and we pick different tests for very specific reasons for people in terms of acutely, what do we need to look at, right? But if I had a favorite test, it's genetics.
Well, I would agree with that because it doesn't change, right? And so as we go through seasons of life, things will ebb and flow. You're going to have periods where you just feel like you are crushing it and you are on cloud 9. And then you have periods where you're like, what the hell is going on? I am inflamed. I have brain fog. I'm not sleeping well. And a lot of this comes down to like what pathways get dirtied up. Maybe what have we been exposed to? So let's say that you, for example, that we see this a lot in our practice, especially for those with a lot of inflammatory blocks and immunological issues underlying. Why can I not get over these chronic issues? Or why, when I have gotten sick, do I put on 10 pounds and I really struggle to get it off? It is because of the way that the immune system is responding. And so that's a really cool piece that the genetics can tell us, because then in that season, we can be more specific about, hey, these are the things then that you can do to target calming things down. Supplemental things, yes, but more importantly, dietary-wise and lifestyle-wise, maybe with your exercise. I had somebody mention to me yesterday, we get a lot of crazy in-depth questions on Instagram, and I'm not meaning to be like short with people, but to be frank, I have a lot of clients that invest in their health, and I don't have the time to sit on Instagram and message a lot back and forth. And so it's really where I'm saying yeah, it sounds like you do need to take a period of rest. This person was really, really inflamed, leg swelling, all this stuff that she was saying. She said, basically, should I take some time off of exercise? And I was like, probably. Yep, that would sound like a good thing to do, because what is happening is that your body is in a fight or flight state. And as much as stress from exercise is a good thing. It's only a good thing when it's in the right doses and the right amount. And so we have to know when we tailor back. And so in the seasons of life that you go through, you can always come back and reference these things. And, you know, for me, I'll share, I am getting the 3x4 because so my father was just diagnosed with dementia, and we're going to have a long road ahead of us. My mom passed away in 2017 of ALS. Two completely different things here, right? One eats the brain, one eats the body. And on my Pro 7, as you guys will see when we go through this, all of my autophagy genes are completely blocked. In fact, so much detriment from this. I remember it was a Friday and my mentor called me and was like, I need you on Zoom right now. We have to talk about this. This is like very, very bad. And so I've shared a little bit about that. We'll go into it. But on the Pro 7, it doesn't show me APOE. On the 3x4, it does show me the APOE. Now, I understand that a lot of you won't have the investment to do both, and not all of you are going to need to, but this is a recent diagnosis, and I just did a course on the 3x4, so I said I want it for myself because I do want to see what this looks like. I have no doubt in my mind that there are genetic predispositions to some level of Alzheimer's, dementia, and things like that, also because of what I saw on Pro 7, but it just prioritizes it differently. So let's get into this. If you guys are watching us, I think that there's 4 seasons of life that I would really tell you it would be smart to utilize a test, so a genetics test. So kind of these primary reasons is, as I've mentioned, like maybe you have a lot of family ailments. Like I just shared about my mom and my dad, right? So I want to know, like, how bad are these things? How much of it was maybe their lifestyle that drove them, or how much of it was genetics? Because I don't know either set of grandparents. My parents were older. I'm the youngest of 6. So it could be that there's a case of adoption. It could be that a parent has passed away. You never knew that person. That's a very specific reason why you might want to run this. I would also say if you're the person who has a lot of chronic issues and you have children, you kind of want to know, like between myself and my husband having genetic testing done, I know for Mr. Marcus and the baby on the way, some things that we need to consider. So I think it's very helpful there. I think it's also really good, as I mentioned before, you want to answer a specific question. I have a great diet. I've done a lot of healing protocols and my exercise is on point, but maybe my lipid panel is going up. Should I avoid saturated fats? Like, are there specific things I should do within my diet and my exercise really to optimize? So you can answer a specific question here, right? You could literally just say, hey, I'm the person that just wants to know everything about me. I want to make sure that I'm optimal and dialed in with my training. I'm optimal and dialed in with fasting if that's right for me. I'm optimal and dialed in with any supplementation long term. It's a really great test for that. And then a really big reason why Becca and I use this and have come to use this is twofold. One, we were stuck, very stuck in our journeys, doing, again, a lot of right things. And so we had done various testing. We had done the MRT and the food. Well, I did an MRT. She's resistant to doing an MRT, and I understand why. My
genetics shows at least foot 2 and a lot of like the gut stuff I don't really deal with as much.
Yeah.
So, you know. It's more liver.
She just said, I'm not getting an MRT because if coffee shows up, I'm not giving up either way.
also that.
But so when you feel like you're stuck, and then to piggyback on that, a lot of it is, and I can tell you numbers of clients that this has happened with now. Just yesterday, I had a client and she was very emotional at the end of the call because she has spent thousands upon thousands of dollars working with some of the best functional medicine doctors. And we answered so many questions for her yesterday, not just for her, but for her mother and her grandmother and some of the cancers in her family, breast and ovarian cancer. And she has a daughter. So we got to spend some time talking about that. So this we will do a lot of times at the beginning of our work with a client when we know that they have been doing a lot of work and it's not working. So when all else fails, we come back to this. And now I am able to pull in certain specific peptides. I'm able to adjust her diet accordingly, and I'm able to adjust some things that we're going to talk about as it relates to very impaired methylation. So let's pull up the test. Let's get into this.
Yes.
There's 7 different areas here. That's why it's called the Pro 7. And we are going to just walk you through each pathway. We're not going to do gene by gene. That's something that we do individually if you're doing an interpretation with us. So if that's something you want, link is in the show note for that. You purchase the package. It's $597. to me, it's extremely reasonable,
Oh, gosh,
especially
yeah.
for the value that you get. Because I don't know about you, I still spend probably 2.5 hours between the interpretation and the follow-up, because we want this to be something that's so fine-tuned and so detailed that you can, again, like I mentioned before, have a roadmap for life and come back to it.
Yep. So before we dive into the actual test, we need to explain genes a little bit because it will help you understand what we're about to go into. So all genes have a very specific job. And the way that I can explain this the best is think of the analogy of an assembly line. You have like 10 to 15 people working on an assembly line. One person's pouring the food into the container. The next person scrapes off the excess. The next person taste tests. The next person puts the lid on. The next person puts the label on. The next person packages it, the shipping label, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Each one of those people has a very different job, but all of those jobs work together to get one product, to get one result, right? That's kind of how your genes work. They all work on one very specific thing within the body. We have hundreds of genes. They are not all shown on these tests, right? But they work together on a bigger team thing. They are a team together. So if one person is struggling on that team, we may be okay with the rest of the team picking up the slack. The problem can come in if there are many genetic mutations and many things that are impaired, and that's where we can discuss options on how to support. The second thing to understand is that genes all can have different levels of impairment or mutation or blockage or whatever you want to call or term it. But genes have these levels of mutation that impair their ability to do their job. And in the words of Ben Lynch, the dirtier your lifestyle, well, now we, deal with a much dirtier situation in terms of the genes kind of rearing the head of their predispositions, right? And so depending on which test you get, you can see either for the tests that we have shown here, red, yellow, or green, like on the Pro 7. Green is technically no mutation of that gene. But again, if you have a dirty lifestyle, you may cause that gene to become dirty. Yellow is a partial block or a partial mutation. Basically, like there is a mild or a moderate impairment to that gene being able to do its job. And then red is a full impairment or a very, large impairment to that gene being able to do its job. On the 3x4, you get a little bit more, detail in terms of low, medium, high, very high, and a little bit other in terms of interaction. But ultimately what this means is that the gene either has no mutation or a low, no predisposition for impairment, all the way to this gene is fully blocked, has a much easier time being triggered per se to struggle to do its job. And the last thing is that, like I mentioned, they work as a team. So it's never, I have this mutation and this mutation is causing all of my problems. No, okay? There's kind of like a fear-mongering way of looking at genes. And in my opinion, I think also, this is my tinfoil hat moment, I think why our medical conventional system will only run certain genes like an APOE, a BRCA, things that, for example, I have known and heard situations of people that have a BRCA gene positive and know they have breast cancer or uterine cancer in their history, and as a precaution, remove all of their female parts. And I've heard more than one story of this, which is devastating. Like, I cannot, and again, there is so much fear rooted in that decision that I just can't get on board with it. Like, I really can't. There are so many other options to go before you go that route. Cancer is such an in-depth thing. It is such a complex thing. It is not you have one gene and you are destined for it. Mm-hmm. So take that for what you may. But at the end of the day, genes work together. They can back each other up. They can help each other out. If one gene is struggling, as long as all the other genes in that, system are fine and you have a good lifestyle, you're typically fine, right? And what we want to look for are larger mutations, all within the same kind of functioning system, and then how they affect each other, right? We know methylation in turn affects neurotransmitter production. It affects detoxification abilities. It will affect histamine. There's so many other things that just methylation will affect that you have to take it into account. You cannot just supplement a gene. You cannot supplement a mutation, which we're going to talk about. But what we do when we look at this test is we connect it to the client's health, their history, their symptoms, and ultimately what you can do to support it long-term in terms of dietary protocols, fasting, HRT, further testing sometimes, supplementation, right? So let's break it down. Let's look at, in particular, Pro 7, and ultimately how you can get the most benefit from it.
Yeah. So you guys probably heard MTHFR. It's got a big buzzword behind it, thanks to, I think, the 10X company, and I'm forgetting the guy's name, Gary Becca. So MTHFR is one of many genes in methylation. All right. So if you can see here, this is my test that I'm sharing with you. We're going to pull up Becca's as well at some point because we have a bit different profiles. We're two different individuals, right? But on this methylation page, what we're looking at is the C677T, which is the main MTHFR. But what you're also going to see is the 1298C, and this is kind of secondary. It has the same functions. And then below this, where it says SLC, this is a transport gene. And you can see that I am totally blocked here. So we take this section here all the way from the top where it says FLOR1, floor 1 down to SLC, and we put it into a methylation calculator. And what that essentially tells us is how much methylfolate does the person need because they aren't absorbing enough from their food because of these impairments. And then we think about the transport gene being fully blocked here. Like the client that I gave yesterday, because I don't have my numbers off the top of my head, but the client that I did yesterday, she had the full block here in the SLC as well as many other blocks. She would only absorb 6.48%. So she needs folate in her supplementation cabinet for life, and she is going to need that probably twice a day. In the second area here, where we get into the MTRR section, it says methyl B12. Clinical pearls is where we come in with our interpretation, and we say, hey, what about this individual do we know? We know that she has anxiety. So what we don't want to do is over-methylate her, make anxiety worse. And so while this test says that methyl B12 can be helpful, what you're going to see below that is methyl B12 and
Adenosol.
Adenosol B12. Talking too fast. Adenosol B12, or there's hydroxyl B12. There's other forms of B vitamins that we can give that are not the methyl form that won't over-methylate or make her feel a little bit more anxious, because methyl vitamins, B12 specifically, can be more excitatory to people. Now, there are some people that I have studied under that basically say methylation of, supplementation with B12 and B6 and choline and all of this stuff, methylated B vitamins are like a cheap life insurance, as they call it, because we know that this is such an important process. It is, in fact, why it's the number one, pathway that we're looking at. It has a downstream effect, but there's always going to be the caveats, right? So for my client yesterday, she does struggle with a little bit more worry. She said, even as a child, my dad would tell me I worry a lot, and so I'm more anxious. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give her a little bit of methyl B12, but I'm not going to give her too much, and I'm going to use other forms. And we're going to cycle some things for her, and we're going to see, do I do better? Does she do better? In addition to, how she feels day to day, her lab work, because here's where we're going to check homocysteine, and we're going to look and say, how dirty is this process in the body? So lab work is one that assists. It's a very specific blood marker. It's $18 in our LabCorp, panel. I don't know why your doctors don't do it more. It's so important. But let's back up for a second and just talk about beyond MTHFR. What the hell is methylation? What is this big word? Number one, we have a full podcast that we're going to link out that talks all about this in depth. But I'm going to give you just a really, really high level here. So essentially, it's the act of giving a methyl group to another compound to alter the chemical structure. The way that I like to say this in the simplest terms, think about turning something from a fat-soluble compound to a water-soluble compound so we can get it out of the body. That is what methylation does. It helps us make things, but also detox things. All right. And so, for example, methylation helps us create melatonin, creatine, and epinephrine. It supports the detox of histamine. How many of you out there struggle with allergies, seasonal allergies, histamine intolerance from certain foods, wine, things like that are making you stuffy or red or sneezy, itchy, watery eyes? But most importantly, it also helps with your estrogen detoxification and clearance, as well as some other things that we're going to talk about. So I just think that this is really important to understand. And then at the bottom of that page too, I want to talk a little bit about the GIF. So this is gastric intrinsic factor. This tells me how much I'm going to absorb in the gut. Okay. So I have a partial block here. I know that I'm going to do better with maybe taking some sublinguals or lozenges. I already have a half or a full block in my transport gene and a half block in my gastric intrinsic factor. I want to surpass the gut so that I can actually get it into the body and absorb it better. Later on down the line here today, you're going to see that we look at some things related to the gut microbiome. And when we get into that section, it's going to tell us, are we more prone to needing more pre and probiotics? Are we prone to having inflammation in the gut? And therefore, if that is blocked, which you're going to see that it is for me, we need pre and probiotics and B12 continuously. A lot of people think that bacteria create B12, and there's some truth to that, but it is not for you. Bacteria create B12 for themselves. So really, where we're getting our B12 is from our diet, things like, beef and choline supplementation, or if we're thinking, not choline supplementation, choline-rich foods, things like eggs. There's a lot of things that give us different B vitamins, leafy greens, a variety of different foods. But what we want to really think about is, if I have this pathway that is fully blocked, I want to check my homocysteine marker. And my homocysteine marker is clear, so I'm sitting well right now. That is not always the case for individuals. And so when we see, like my client yesterday, she's been high homocysteine for over 2 years. The doctor that she was working with was giving her methylated B12, wasn't doing anything for her. Why? Well, I can tell you that this particular client wasn't filtering her water, she wasn't filtering her air, and she wasn't focused on diet. She never had a dietary protocol. She's been on this plan for 3 weeks, and she said, my mind has stopped racing at night, my energy is better, my inflammation is dropping. Like, a lot of things are shifting for her. And I said, next month, we're going to give it a full 8 weeks. We're going to check this homocysteine, and we're going to see, because she's in the double digits, are we down into the single digits? And then we're going to adjust accordingly. So I just wanted to really drive this home, because if you are going to test and address, then you need to retest and make sure that what you're doing is working. Because so many people out there right now are just talking about the MTHFR and folate and B vitamins and all of it. Listen, B6 is important, choline is important, all of it's valuable and important, but there's a tipping point, and Becca's going to talk about that when we talk about neurotransmitters, because you can absolutely get into over methylating. Mm-hmm. So it's a big one.
On to the next page, which is neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitter genetic mutations have a lot to do with someone's risk-taking, extreme addictive behavior, personality types, mood dysfunctions, anxiety, depression. We always joke that, like, people that have all blocks on this page, and Liz is mostly blocked, I am fully blocked on at least half of these and partially blocked on the others. They are either like very successful type A billionaires or homeless, because they have these extreme personalities. And a lot of it has to do with how they struggle to detoxify and break down their neurotransmitters. So then we have the need for higher levels of dopamine and the need for higher levels of adrenaline and all of these things. And then they stay high in the system, which then affects our mood, and it affects blood sugars and all of these things. So the first one we look at here is COMT. COMT has a lot to do with the inactivation. Basically, its function is to inactivate neurotransmitters, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, by the addition of a methyl group. So we just talked about methylation. Now you're seeing how methylation impacts another major genetic system, okay? To this catecholamine, the catecholamines being the dopamine, epinephrine. Normal COMT function allows people to rapidly reverse feelings of anxiety or depression. It allows people to get in and out of those, oh, I had a rough day, but I'm over it, right? Versus other people, this, I am this, that bothers me, and now I'm bothered all day by it. Like, I can't snap myself out of moods. I know the mood, I feel the mood, and I can't get out of it. And so it's this like sluggish ability to switch this anxiety and depressive episodes. And in those cases, things like choline, which then affects methylation, right, which then affects this, can be helpful. So we are huge. I mean, in general, don't do drugs. But if you have genetic testing that shows you have impairments here, definitely don't do drugs. You will be a very addictive type. We see a lot of times, the alcoholics, the people that have true addictions. For me, my exercise addiction, I know it was because of this page. My page looks even worse than this. And so, like, you need to be careful with moderation, and you need to understand that stress impacts you differently, okay? Another big thing with the COMT is that it affects the methylation of 4-OH E1 to 4-OME E1, which harmful estrogen pathway, essentially. Okay, so when you look at the 3x4, you get a little bit of additional information on this. So there's something called the A allele variant that can have a 3-fold to 4-fold reduction in enzyme activity compared to the G allele variant. Okay, the A allele has been associated with disadvantaged processing aversive stimuli, reducing appetite, OCD, anxiety, and furthermore, COMT metabolizes estrogen like we talked about. And a study found that people with this mutation, this full block, have higher levels of free estradiol and earlier pubertal development than girls with the non-blocks or the GG genotype, suggesting that the A allele may be associated with less efficient estrogen clearance. And we know that that can lead to uterine-based cancers, estrogen-based cancers, especially with this genetic mutation, that can cause poor detoxification pathways to be going on. Okay.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on this here. So for me, you saw that I had a half block. That essentially says I have one A allele and one G allele. And we forgot. I apologize. This is my fault because I was supposed to do this on the methylation page. Red, yellow, green. Think of a stoplight here, okay? Green is that there's no mutation block that you got neither from your parents, right? Nothing came through. You're clean. Your genes are clean. Born clean, not acting clean always. Yellow is that you have inherited this block or this SNP impairment from one parent. We don't know which parent. We hope that maybe someday the scientific, ability with research and everything will give us that. That's one question that I had right away. It's like, well, how do I know? Did this come from my mom? Did it come from my dad? We don't know. And then red essentially is mean that it came from both parents. So you have a full block here. And that's what Becca is saying with that double A genotype. If I had that, like my client did yesterday, my COMT would be fully red. Is yours red? Fully blocked?
Mine is yellow. My MAOB is fully red.
Okay. So, this is a big kahuna. Like this is one of
COMT
the
is a big one.
genes that we look at. And then later on, we're going to look at another one that talks about estrogen because, for example, again, I'm just going to the case that I had yesterday because it's so fresh in my mind. The grandmother and the mother both had, estrogen-based cancers and died of those things. We want to get ahead of this for people, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not just looking at this. It's also then saying for this person, I said, we need to get a Dutch test because the Dutch test tells us, as Becca was talking about, the harmful estrogen pathway, how much estrogen is being pushed down that compared to the protective pathway. And so we can look at that and we can glean some insight just from the Dutch about COMT, about methylation, but estrogen methylation specifically. It's just now that when we start to pair the genetic test with the Dutch test and the lab work with homocysteine, we have all answers that we need to really help this person be preventative. That's the big thing that we do. We are about preventative care. Mm-hmm. We are not about sick care.
Yep. So if you have this slow COMT, a lot of times these people are very high energy, type A, productivity focused. They have sleep issues, they have anxiety, they have PMS. And you need to be careful with caffeine and how you manage caffeine. You need to be careful with overexertion because, again, what will happen is you will essentially feel that nervousness, tension, having to check off the boxes. Serotonin then gets too high, dopamine gets depleted, and now you feel depressed. You go back and forth between these I'm so on top of the world, I'm checking off everything, I have to be super productive, I can't sit down on the couch ever, I can't relax ever. And then you go through a period where you feel depressed because your body essentially can't keep up and this buildup happens. And then the depressive state will happen after. Fast COMT have a lot of times people have high stress tolerance. They tend to be a little bit more distracted. And there's ways you approach both of those. So again, you have to know how you're looking at the test and the person. MAOA is the next one on here. And this breaks down chemicals called monoamines. Okay, so serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Typically, people that have COMT and MAOA are the type of people that we see with psychiatric disorders. So again, it's not a chemical in the brain thing. It is a genetic mutation and poor lifestyle thing. We have to know these things. And so when you see fast MAOA, a lot of times those people have alcoholism, addictions, ADHD, carb and sugar cravings, depression. Slow MAOA, difficulty falling asleep, overactive startle reflux, headaches, irritability, mood swings, rage or aggressive behavior, trouble relaxing. So the blocking in that MAOA a lot of times will be that. The blocks, we see more carb cravings, having difficulty sleeping. They're sad more often. And when we see these, People get gray hairs easier. They end up gray earlier on because of a tryptophan steal that happens. And essentially with the block, you start to affect other chemicals and enzymes in the body that can cause gray hair. Crazy. Look at our genetics. So my dad went fully white at the age of 34. He was black hair. My dad was black hair. I have blonde, so you can't tell.
Wasn't he also an entrepreneur?
My dad was also an entrepreneur and woke up at 4 a.m. and worked in a factory full of chemicals. So there are some things. There was some writing in the sky, as he would say. Also with this, you want to avoid certain probiotics because they can affect the breakdown of histamine. Histamine is a major thing that gets impaired with this. We'll see later on, there's another marker that affects histamine, external histamine breakdown, like alcohol and things in our environment. And so we would need to kind of look at not just, again, one gene. You have to look at the whole understanding of the tests and multiple genes and how they affect each other. And then we get into MAOB, which will largely affect histamine breakdown in particular. So Liz has a partial block here. I had a full block in MAOB. I am awful when it comes to histamine.
And she responds really bad to alcohol.
Horribly. I'm like allergic to alcohol because of the impact. I have a partial block in the actual histamine, the AOC, and I have a full block in this. And I have some methylation blocks. So like everything that affects the breakdown of histamine, I get very irritable skin. My kid does too. Poor Carson totally got my genes. Today I was looking at his hand. He has 3 huge welts from bug bites on his hand. And I was like, when did these happen? These weren't here yesterday. Like,
better get that active skincare.
I have it. He itches them so much that they bleed. Like the poor kid has my histamine issues. Taylor doesn't. She has Nick's. Probably why Nick handles alcohol just fine. Like, so anyways, again, it explains you, right? It explains you and the things that you deal with. And like, I'm not broken. GAD1. So GAD1, a lot of times when there's blocks here, we have more anxiety-driven things. You can be more depressed, but it's usually more anxiety. And the reason is because when these GAD1s get blocked, people tend to favor what's called the glutamate pathway. GAD1 has a large play in how GABA is created. GABA is that neurotransmitter that helps you feel calm, helps you, manage extreme emotions, helps not have fear as much. Glutamate's the opposite. Glutamate gives all those things.